All right, so now we can actually start setting up our environment to fetch data from the back end as far as our register and authentication is concerned. So what I'll do is I'll come here. First off, I'm going to install two dependencies, and I'll just say npm install, and the first one is Axios. Axios will help us, make HTTP requests to the back end. And the second one is React Toastify. So React hyphen Toastify, like so. Yeah, that's it. And then just hit enter. So that's going to start installing. Now for the front end, inside of my source folder, folder is getting so much. So inside of my source folder, I'm going to create another folder that I'll call services. Services, yeah. And of course, inside the services folder, I'll create a file. So I'll call this auth service.js. Everything that concerns making HTTP requests to the back end, I'm going to have it inside of this auth services. So then one more thing is we're going to have a .env file that will point to the back end. So our backend URL, we're going to slot it inside the .env file. So that's localhost port 5000. So let me come, and it's going to be inside the root of this folder. So front end, and then I'll just say .env. Aha. So inside of my .env, I'll create a variable. So react underscore app underscore backend. Okay. And let me just specify it. So backend URL. So that's going to be equal to, remember, HTTP, and then localhost port 5000. Great. So we're going to use this backend URL. So let's go ahead and save this. Now, anytime you add something to this your variable, your .env file, anytime you add a variable to it, I think you need to restart your application so that you can be able to access that variable anytime you make changes to it. So I'm going to restart my own React app, and then we're going to continue. So let me quickly do that. I'll pause the video and then close my React app and open it again. So as you can see, my two packages have installed. So now let me go ahead and restart my app. So I'll come here and so I'll just Control C to close that, and then I'll say yes that I want to close it, and then I'll just say npm start, yeah, and then to just restart the application. So that's it. All right, so now let's continue. Okay, so my server has restarted. Now I can close the .env file, and then I'll just go back to my let me close all these things I'm not using for now. So sidebar, I'm done with that. Dashboard, well, if I need it, I'll come back to it. Dashboard item, and even the home. All right, so now in my auth services, technically we're just going to import some things that we need. So first off, we're going to import Axios, and that's going to come from the Axios. And remember, this auth services, it's not a component, it's just a file, auth services.js. So you see it starts with a small letter, so don't confuse it. All right, so now import Axios, then I'm going to point to my backend URL. So here I'll just say const, and I'll create a variable called backend, let me just say underscore URL, and I'll set it to point to my process.env dot, and then this is going to be react underscore app, then underscore backend URL. Yeah. So this is, whenever I want to use the backend URL, I'm going to put this backend URL in the front of whatever path that I want, then so that I can use it any other place in my application, I can just go ahead and export it. So that's it. All right, so now there's one thing though, we are going to create a function. So I'll just create an arrow function to register what's it called, a user. So here, let's just use my shortcut arrow function, and then I'll just tap that. I'll close this guy up, and oh no, I want to create it with async await. So here I'll just do think AAF is what I use for that shortcut. Great, so that's it. Asynchronous arrow function. So here I'll just call the name of that function register user, and then I'll export it so that I can use it any other place. So technically here I just want to create the function to register a user. Now whenever I want to register a user, remember there is some information that I'm going to send to the database, and I'll just call that, I'll give that a parameter of user data. Okay, great. So now we'll come in here and we're going to try to register the user, and we're going to do this with try catch. So try catch. Great. Now we want to register the user, so here I'll say const response, and that's going to be equal to, now is where we now use Axios. So I'll say await Axios dot, when we want to register a user, remember it's a post request, so this is going to be Axios dot post, and then we're just going to open a parenthesis. It's going to take 3 parameters, 2 of which is absolutely necessary. So the first will be the URL that you want to make a request to, and for that we're going to use backticks. So backticks. Then the second will be the data that you want to send to that API endpoint, and remember we've created a parameter for that, that's user data. So here I'll just put user data. Then the last thing is you want to be able to allow this request to get some form of credential from that API endpoint. Remember that when we make when we register a user, we are getting back a cookie from that backend URL, and it's that cookie that will be saved in our front end and enable us to know that this user is logged in. So there is a property in Axios that you need to specify to be able to get that cookie and then save it in your browser, and that property is going to enter an object. The name of that property is with credential. So you see I already have autocomplete here, and we're going to set that to true. If you don't set this with credential to true, you will not be able to get any data and save in your front end from the back end except the JSON data. So for us to be able to save the cookie and tell our browser that this user is logged in now, you need to be able to accept credentials from the back end. All right, so that's about it. Now let's go ahead and okay, there's one thing I should probably do. Now remember that we are also going to make another request to log in the user. Does it mean that we'll be adding this with credential everywhere? Well, technically yes, that's what it means, but there's a way we can simplify this process from the root of our application. So what we can do is I'll just go to the app.js, which is the root of our application, and then I'll import Axios here. So I'll just come here and say let me see if I can auto import it. Axios, come on, help me out. See, I'll just import this thing manually. So from my auth here, I'll just grab the line of code that I used to import Axios. I don't know why Visual Studio Code is not helping me today. Okay, so I'll come here and then I'll just say Axios, then I'll set a default. So I'll say Axios.default plural, and then I'll set the property that I want to, make a default. So here I'll just say with credential. Come on, help me out. Credentials, and I'll set that to be equal to true. Okay, so what this is going to do is that anytime you make a request with Axios across the full application, the full front end, it's going to make sure that you are able to save credentials. So I'll just go ahead and save this, and because we've done this here, we've set a default property here. What that means is that we can skip adding this with credentials everywhere in our application, and it's still going to save the credentials of that user. But of course I'll just leave this first one so that at least we know how to set it in a single URL. So now let's slot in the URL here. So first off, we are going to append this backend URL, which is localhost port 5000. So here I'll say I'll use my string interpolation syntax here, and I'll add my backend underscore URL, and then / what's the URL to register a user. So if you remember, if we bring up our Insomnia here, just to remind you, Okay, so if you click on register user, you see the URL here. So it's API. Oh, so this guy's okay. So it's API/users/register, and you see it's a post request. So you can even just grab this, line of text here like this, and just copy that. Okay, then let's come back to our code editor here. So here I'll just say /API/users/register. This is the URL. Okay, then you're sending the data and you're saving the credentials. So now after you make that request, well, what you want to do is I want to be able to send a message to the front end, or just throw a notification to the front end that this user has been registered successfully, and I'll just do that in this try block. So here I'll just say, first off, I'll check if the response is okay. So if we're able to register that user, and the way I'll check is I'll say if response dot, there's a property that comes with the response when you make a response with Axios. Then the name of that property is status text. Okay, and I'll say that if that is equal to okay, capital letter okay, then I want to just throw a notification, and the notification, I'm going to throw that notification with toast, React Toastify. So but remember, we've not set up React Toastify. Anyway, let me just do it here first, then we'll now set it up. So I'll say toast dot success. No, this should be toast, sorry, toast.success, and then you're just going to send your message here. So here I'll just say registered successfully, registered ERED, or let's just say user registered successfully. Okay, that's a lot better. So now this toast here, we can import it, so it's not importing. Anyway, I'll just import it manually. So I'll just come here and say import and toast. And where are we importing it from? We're importing it from React Toastify -Toastify. Aha, so you see we have that option because we've installed it. Now, of course, this will not work immediately because you have just a little bit of setup to do in the front end. That's the app here. So I'll come here and let me just expand this guy, and then I'll just come to npmjs.org, search for React Toastify, and I'll click on it. So this is the first result here, and that is the package that we need. So I'll just scroll down and let's just see the setup that we need to just have. So so this is it, working with React. In your app.js, right, you need to import this toast container and then this CSS file. So that's the first import we need to have. So I'll just copy this guy like this, and then I'll come to my app.js and I'll import it. So I'll come down here and then I'll just import it. I'm not going to be using any toast in the app.js, so I can remove the toast. But you see this toast container, absolutely needed. Then let's come back here. After you've imported that, you also need to add that toast container. So you see this toast container here, right? I'll copy it, this component. I'll copy that, and then I'll go back to my app.js. This toast container to just enter somewhere here. So inside this browser router, not inside the route, so just inside the browser router, I'll just slot in that toast container. You can slot it at the top or at the bottom, it doesn't matter. So but you need to absolutely do this for us to be able to use React Toastify. So let's go ahead and save that, and then I'll just come back to my auth services so that we can finish up. So now that we have created what's it called, this try block, if this is successful, then at the end I just want to return the data that I get. So I'll just say return response dot data. Okay, so that's it. Now what about if there's an error for some reason? Maybe the user's connection went off or something went wrong. How are we going to catch that error? Well, I'm going to put it inside a variable called message. So here I'll say const message, and whenever we are making a request to backend using Axios, there are different ways that we can actually get the message. It can be in the error.response, it can be in the error.response.data, it can be in the error.response.data.message. So many. So we're just going to have like a list of all of those possible error formats so that we can catch whichever one it is, and then send it to the user. So what I'll just do is I'll say this is it may look a little bit complex, but it's just something that you need to know. So here I'll say if error dot response then, and then I'll say and error dot response dot data. Okay, then I'll say and error dot response dot data dot message. Okay, now we're going to close this guy. So let me just come here and just bring my closing parenthesis. Now I will there's something I want to do. Okay, I'll add an or operator here, and then I will just say if there's error dot message, which is the one we are very familiar with. Okay, then let's add another or. We're now going to say error dot to string. So we'll convert any error to string, like so, and then I'll just close that. So it looks very long, right? But that's just how we can cover any possible variable where errors can be saved. So here I'll just come down here and then I'll just throw that error as a notification. How am I going to throw it? I'll say toast dot error, and then I'll just throw the message. Okay, so whichever variable that stores the error, it's going to figure it out and then to just send it as a message. And then this is the easiest way for us to be able to pick the error message from the back end. So remember, in the back end, that those pieces of code where we write throw new error, this is the easiest way to make sure that we pick the exact error that we send from the back end to the front end. All right, so technically we've been able to create this function to register the user, but we've not tested it. So in the next video, we are going to now officially test if this function to register the user from the login components. See you in the next one then.